por eso mi cabeza es solamente hay espacio por inglés ahora. Pero es posible de hablar y preguntarme en español. Y vamos a ver. Por eso tengo esta idea, which is about the new global village. And it's a very simple idea. And I'll tell you more about who I am and what I do and what I've done. But I have this idea that we can use technology to redesign how the world is organized, and we can make it more democratic. So that's sort of the idea I have. And I think they can become more people-powered. Because as individuals, we've never been this empowered in history as we are now. Because we're all becoming connected to each other, and we can now start things without asking for approval. So this idea, I mean, it's a long journey, because I started to use the internet in the 1980s. This is a long time ago. That's like 35 years ago. And so I've been part of the early generation of people that's been using the internet, and I've always been using it to create more freedom. So yeah, this is my name, and I view myself as a storyteller. So I get these ideas, and I write about them, and I talk about them. And I'm also a little bit of an activist. So I'm self-employed, I'm independent, so I can say whatever I want, which is good, which I enjoy. I can pretty much do whatever I want as well. And I think it's important that we have people like that, artists and independent people that are sort of challenging the mainstream thinking. So a couple of years ago, I started to explore this idea of becoming a nomad and using technology to free up time, space, and attention. And so for me, any kind of emerging technology is really interesting, because you can use it in a very positive, mindful way, or you can use it in a way that is not so positive. And you can see that on Facebook. Facebook started out as a way of connecting people and communicating, but it's also being misused to get people elected that shouldn't really be elected and so forth, and doing a lot of illegal things. But I still believe in the positive impact on emerging technologies. So I'm a nomad. I have gotten rid of everything, really, all things. House and car and most of my clothes and books, because I can. Because actually today you only need a phone, a passport, and a credit card, and then you can pretty much do whatever you want to do. You can start companies, you can move and live in different parts of the world, you can work wherever you live, and so forth. And that's sort of one promise that technology has, which I'm also writing about in this book. And I say here that home is in the heart, it's not in things, because I believe that we've become so conditioned to think that home is a house, or home is a cool brand, or home is when I drink a soda. And I think it has to do, it's much more a spiritual place. And I wanted to share this because I wanted to set the context a little bit, to let you guys know where I come from and how I see things. And I've done this, I started doing this in the 90s, the first experiments with working from everywhere. And at that time, we didn't really have co-working spaces. We didn't have iPhones. So it was pretty hard. Today is much easier. Today is very simple. And I'll challenge you with the idea that I think anyone from anywhere, independent of where you grew up or what passport you have, you can do this. It's much more of a thought, an idea, and a mind shift than it is a technology shift. And I think everything that's happened now within technology is not really about technology. It's about a mind shift. It's about changing the way that we operate and see the world. So that's sort of just packing it up and giving you a little bit of context where I come from. And in this world, Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrencies are very normal. It's actually the new normal. Fiat currencies are sort of the old solution, that doesn't really work or hasn't really worked that well. And I'll give you a bunch of examples. So this talk, it's more about the promise of Bitcoin than actually how it works. But I'm happy to explain how it works as well, if you're interested. How many of you know what Bitcoin and blockchain are? Please raise a hand. Okay, so I'll go through it quickly. And just like, I'll explain it in the context of what a car is, right? So I could be up here and I can talk about the combustion engine, how the engine on the car works, or I can simply say that a car is a motorized vehicle where you go from A to B that will help you transport yourself much faster. And that's sort of the approach I'm going to have. I'm going to have the simple, non-technical approach to it. So first, I would like you guys to have an open mind. I did a talk 2 days ago at Atlanta, and I had a bunch of people that got very, very angry because it provoked them. And I hope this will provoke you too and push you. But remember, the provocation happens in you, and it's not due to me. It's actually your perspective that's being challenged. So therefore, I ask you to entertain the idea of being open-minded, which is hard. I'm not saying that I'm mastering it. It's challenging, but being open-minded. And to me, that is having the capability of entertaining more than one perspective without any judgment. So you're just looking at something or someone and saying, I understand that. That's interesting. He's doing good things within this space. And you can also recognize and understand that, well, I can understand that people think that he's doing bad things within this space. Just the capability of entertaining a bunch of different perspectives is how I see being open-minded. All right. So Bitcoin and blockchain. So it is actually Bitcoin. All of this is called Bitcoin. But somewhere along the way between when Bitcoin was introduced and as an idea in 2008 and today, it became blockchain. And blockchain is the underlying technology. But Bitcoin is very simple. They're just different sides of the same coin. And Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer electronic payment system. That's what it is. And it's Bitcoin that is that. So Bitcoin is the big new technology. It's been around for about 10 years. And in that exist cryptocurrencies and blockchain and so forth. So we can talk about that too. The big thing with Bitcoin, and the reason that Bitcoin was created, was that these programmers, and I think there's actually a team of programmers known as Satoshi Nakamoto, which is an anonymous group of people. I don't believe it's one person. I think it's a team that's collaborating. That they looked at the current model and they realized that it doesn't work anymore and it doesn't work online. And the model they looked at was the trust-based model. And that means that in anything we do, interacting with any kind of organization, the organization needs to build trust. That's why we have brands. Brands are working on building trust and building stories for us to trust them and believe that what they deliver is actually good and it's the truth and it's what we need or it's what we want. So when Nike is saying that, telling the story that it's important to run, and they're selling shoes and saying with our shoes you will run much better than anything else, we don't know that. We just got to believe that. The same thing then we transferring money and value across, exchanging value, we need to rely on that the banks are actually honest. So in 2008, when this new technology was introduced, banks weren't so honest. And I think the trust for banks and financial institutions since the 2008 Great Recession and almost depression, and where the whole financial system collapsed, is pretty low. And it was in the wake of this that Bitcoin was created and introduced as a new idea. And Bitcoin is this peer-to-peer system. So what they introduced instead of the trust-based model was this idea that if we can use technology, if we can use the internet to create a consensus around the transactions, what is the truth, so people don't need to trust, then we can make it possible to do peer-to-peer transactions, which means that I can send money directly or currency directly to any one of you, and you can send to me using the internet without a third party. And this is huge, because there's got a bunch of different kind of implications if we can solve that. And the main thing here is that it's a peer-to-peer system, which is very challenging. And that's why you have both nation states are saying, no, you're not allowed to create your own cryptocurrencies. You're not allowed to trade cryptocurrencies. You're not allowed to use blockchain because it's threatening the nation state, and also threatening big organizations. What it actually is all about, and going back to the analogy with a car, is it's a new way of thinking. So if you've been paying attention during the past 10, 15, 20, 25 years, when we have had the internet is all about decentralization. The internet is all about connecting people to things and to other people and to information. And it's possible for us to send emails directly to anyone in this room. It's possible for us on social media to have a conversation directly with anyone without using a newspaper or without using TV. And we can even set up our own TV stations. We can write our own books. We can do pretty much anything today. And up until Bitcoin came around, we could do anything except do transactions. We had to rely on fiat currencies, which are basically pesos and dollars and pounds and so forth. And we had to rely on financial institutions. And the financial institutions, they have a very unsecure, slow, and expensive system. So if you're a merchant today, you pay between 3 and 5% to do a transaction. If you live in Chile, for example, where I spend a lot of time, and you're going to transfer money from Chile to England or US or Mexico, you can pay between $50 and $100 for a transaction. While with the Bitcoin platform, you pay a couple of cents. So it's really revolutionary in that way. So think about it as it's sort of the financial version of email. No one actually loses an email. An email is not being lost. So email is, or Bitcoin and this new transactional system is very much built up the same way as email. It's finding the quickest way between A and B. And that's why it becomes so powerful. So this is disrupting financial institutions, organizations. So right now, big organizations, they have a tough time in shifting and understanding how should they communicate on social media, how should they operate, how can they compete with startups, because startups are much more powerful than large organizations, except for maybe politically. And then suddenly there's a new technology now that's disrupting. So decentralization is where I would like to look at and move the conversation. So we used to operate in very centralized organizations, either in nations, where we elected a president or a king or a queen, had the power, and that's sort of the history of humanity. So we lived in organizations that were very centralized. And we're shifting to organizations that are distributed to really decentralized, where we can collaborate in teams that are in different parts of the world, and we can create new things without asking for permission or being told to do X, Y, and Z. So we're seeing this potential for a tremendous new wave of democratization. And that's why you also are seeing the opposite effect when people fear this. There's a lot of people that fear this new liberation of thinking, of ideas, of starting up things. And therefore, that's why you have Brexit. That's why you see the nationalism is flaring in the US. That's why you're seeing in a lot of countries it's now illegal to use blockchain because it's too challenging. So to look at the benefits of Bitcoin and blockchain, there's sort of three key words that I'm usually using to explain it, and that it's both faster, cheaper, and safer. And I'm using a word here that's called cryptography. And it's, if we look at the trust-based model, which uses third parties to handle transactions when you're using credit cards or banking or whatever it is, this new Bitcoin and blockchain system is using cryptographic proof. And I don't think you need to know more about this. So I just want to inspire you to both being interested in this and start to getting engaged in this. And then if you're more interested in what's under the hood and how it actually works, then I'm sure you can look it up, and there's a bunch of stuff on YouTube and so forth. I'm just going to make a couple of claims, what I think that Bitcoin and blockchain can result in, that I find is very positive, where I see that the world has a potential to move towards being much more authoritarian, much more dictatorial, much more centralized, or much more democratic, much more free, and much more decentralized. And I think you're aware of that we, among the 200 nation states that we have in the world, very few work well. There's few countries. So if you take a list of 200 nation states and you say, what are the top 5 countries that work really well, where people are free to do what they want to do, where they get supported in doing the business or whatever they're interested in, where they can travel freely from, you will find that that is a fraction of the number of countries that are around. So I would argue that the whole nation-state idea is a failure. It doesn't work anymore. It's broken. And we need to sort of figure out how to do this. So I'm going to make a bunch of claims here. First, I'm going to take a look at the potential of this. And I like to create a little bit of awareness around the idea that we are actually creating the tools first. So we created the fire. I mean, the fire existed, but we sort of discovered how to make a fire. We innovated cars and bikes and the printing press and the steam engine and all those things. And we did that, and I'm very convinced we did that from the perspective of good. The airplane, when that was invented by the Wright brothers, they invented it because they wanted to create a more peaceful world. Because they thought that if we can fly people in between countries and get them to hang out with each other and make the world a smaller place, then people are not going to fight each other. But then also, the tools, they shape us. So Facebook has shaped you. Instagram is shaping us. Social media is shaping us. How many here are always wearing a phone? Please raise a hand. Is there anyone in here that's not using a smartphone? No? Is there anyone in here that doesn't have a smartphone on them right now? No? Okay, so I'm the only one. I'm walking around my smartphone. And I'm doing that because technology tends to sort of shape us and we don't think about it. 10 years ago, the iPhone was a ridiculous thing. It was a plaything, and we laughed at it. And today we're so addicted that there are studies that have shown that if people forget their, forgetting their kid, picking up the kid at school and forgetting the iPhone at home, do you know which has the higher percentage? Yeah, people hate, not bringing their phone. So there's 86% of the people would go back home and get the iPhone, and I think only 75 people go and pick up their kids at school. So that's sort of, and I think it's important. I'm not judging anyone that's, looking into the screen 24/7. I'm just saying that we create these really cool tools, and then we let them shape us. So the first thing I'd like to take a look at is that I believe that this new technology can solve the corruption that we see in the world. And every year, on a global scale, we pay about $20 trillion in taxes. 10% of those, politicians take, and I haven't broken down by country, but $2 trillion of the money that we're making, that we pay in taxes, are used for corruption. The currency for this is not Bitcoin, it's not cryptocurrencies, it's US dollars. So the conversation that I think you're aware of in magazines and newspapers is, oh my God, this is used for corruption. And that's sort of a distraction, because if you start looking at the big picture, it is not true, because we haven't had cryptocurrencies for that long time. And there are not $2 trillion worth of cryptocurrencies in the world. So therefore, the currencies that are being used are the most used fiat currencies. And here's an opportunity to solve the corruption. And the reason you can do this is that the way that Bitcoin works is that all transactions are digitized, all transactions are stored in a public ledger, distributed across the internet, which means that they cannot be manipulated. So this public ledger is available to anyone to take a look at. And today, when a bank makes transactions, all the transactions in the bank are private. A bank will never, ever share the transactions. A nation state and the budget in a nation state is never, ever shared on a transactional level. So we don't know where the money is going. We don't know all these different kind of slush accounts that's being used for corruption. So I'm making the statement that I think that this new technology can solve this. And if you start looking at 20 trillion US dollars on a global scale, I think that can solve poverty, I think that can solve education for everyone, and I think it can solve healthcare. And that's sort of the level I think we should take a look at things, because this is a huge problem. This is not a problem in the context of that someone is having a sort of a bad day. This is a gargantuan kind of problem that I think is worthwhile looking at and trying to solve. Next one, poverty. So 3 billion people are without bank accounts because banks are expensive to run, so they cannot afford to give bank accounts to 3 billion people. So today in the world we have between 7 and 8 billion people. So we're talking about 40% of people in the world don't have a bank account. And the truth with this is, if you don't have a bank account, you cannot be part of the global wealth creation. And a lot of those people are in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. So you're being excluded because you cannot and you're not allowed to create your own bank account. So I think with this new technology, where you actually have your own digital wallet, which no one is saying that you can or cannot have, and you can store your own currency, and you can be part of the trade and create a part of the global wealth. I think this can be one of the tools we use to decrease the global poverty. Climate change. So I've looked into this, and I think we have less than 100 years on this planet if we continue the way we're doing. I'm sorry if I'm bumming you out, but I want to push you to a certain point where you start, thinking a little bit about the enormous potential we have and the enormous impact we can make as individuals if we're smart about this. I've even heard the other day that we have 56 years left. And I think the climate change, nothing is really happening on a large scale due to the fact that politicians don't have any influence outside of their own country. There's no one that's looking at the big picture and saying, no, wait a second, we were actually destroying, our own national parks, so let's be a little bit smart about this. So that's another area I think this technology can solve. Another one is inequality. So 1% of people in the world, so top 1%, they own more than 50% of the global wealth. And the global wealth is estimated to about $300 trillion. And this gap is increasing. If we can shift and start to become much more decentralized and start to collaborate and still create businesses, still create a lot of value, but much more distributed, I believe that we can sort of level the playing field. So there's a couple of things. Here's the last thing, the fair trade. I think we can accelerate this amazing idea of fair trade with using this new technology. And the reason is that with this new technology, it's very much about verifying and registering transactions. And any kind of exchange between two entities is a transaction. So if I would, now I don't have my phone here, but if I would lend you my hat, that is a transaction. You're borrowing my hat, I'm lending you my hat, that's a transaction, and we could have that registered. You can also rent my hat, and that's also a transaction. So if we can verify to show that this transaction is true, and also register it publicly, then with everyone having access to it in the world and being able to, just like we look up things on Google, we can look up and see what do politicians spend our money on. We can also do that with products. So you can register your products on the blockchain, and it's something that's called supply chain management. So the blockchain in itself can actually verify that this coffee that comes from Colombia hasn't been created, or no child labor has worked on it. Everyone that's worked on creating and delivering this or growing these coffee beans are being paired fairly. You can also see that there's no money laundering, there's no trafficking associated with the creation of this product. You can also guarantee that people are getting paid in every part of the supply chain. That's the power of it. And I think this is more important to talk about the potential to get you interested or maybe disinterested in this technology, because it's new and there's so much opportunity with this, than explaining the nuts and bolts. I'm going to let you figure that out. So to me, this is just the tip of the iceberg where we are. I think when we talk about sort of digital transformation and change, we haven't even started. It's a thousands of a percent. The change that we are standing right in front of and that we're going to see for the next 10, 15 years is going to be gargantuan. It's going to be dramatic, the change. We haven't, I mean, even though that we've been spending, and I've been spending 30 years on the internet, we haven't done basically anything compared to what's happening and what's going to happen, which I find very interesting and fascinating, because I like change. I like when things are moving along. But this is my personal perspective, and I understand and I respect everyone else's perspective if you feel that the change is done and now we have this new society and it is what it is. I like to share something that I do when I work a lot with executive teams in large corporations, and I'm help them to sort of think about the future and shift mindset and look at things from different perspectives. And I ask them 4 questions after I've done a workshop. Because learning is a personal responsibility. Education is something different, but learning things that's what you have to do from a personal perspective. And it actually only matters on a personal perspective. So I usually ask them 4 questions. And the first one is, what happened? Today, what happened? Or what happened in this, what's your perspective? What's your perception? What was happening here? The second thing, how did it make me feel? So the things that I shared here, how did that make you feel? Did you feel that this is insane, it's not true, this is sort of scary, I'm excited, I see, and so forth? What were your most powerful insights? It's sort of a way of bringing learning home. And the last one is, how will I bring these into my life? And there's no really right or wrong with this. It's just looking at something, whatever happens or whatever is merging, and since life, from my perspective, is sort of a learning journey, is reflecting over those. So before the last slide, I'm going to ask you to spend 1 minute individually, in silence, and just think about these 4 questions. What does this mean to you? What happened? How did you feel? And how do you see that you can sort of bring this forward in what you're doing when you leave this place? It's 1 minute. All right, I think that was a minute. My watch is not working, but I think that was about a minute. And I'm not going to ask you to, if you don't want to. I mean, if there's anyone wants to share, feel free to do that. We're moving into Q&A. But I just want to say this. When I ask these questions to people that you see in magazines and newspapers, executives, CEOs and stuff, they are scared shitless. No one wants to start. It's very human. No one wants to start to be that personal and say how they felt and what this means to them. So I just want to do that in sort of making it more human. I just want to end with this before the Q&A, with this quote, which I think is fantastic, and which a person that has been very inspirational to me, and which I think is one of the most prominent politicians that we ever had. And he said, as John F. Kennedy, our problems are man-made, therefore they may be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Even though that might feel it that way, it's not. And that's the potential, and that's my perspective on how technology can be used. It can be used in a very meaningful way, and it's just about having a little bit of imagination and designing a dream, and recognize that asking why not is often much more powerful than asking why. All right, any questions or thoughts? Please. Thank you.
Is it okay if they ask questions in Spanish?
Sí.
Ok, entonces pueden preguntar en español si se sienten más cómodos o en inglés. Adelante.
Hola.
Hola.
Hola. I'd like you to reflect. Well, my experience with Bitcoins is zero. It's just ads on magazines or banners that try to sell it to you as if it were this miraculous business-making, no-effort thing, no? Mm-hmm. Could you reflect upon that, please?
Yes. Well, yeah, the trading part, I see that. I mean, it happened the same thing in the 90s with the IPOs, with the new companies, with dot-coms. It happened during the tulip craze in the Netherlands. It happened in the gold rush in the 19th century. Every time there's a new technology or new platform, there's always people and organizations that want to benefit from that and selling the tools or selling the dream. And it's a little bit in that context that I like to sort of raise the bar and say, yeah, sure. I mean, if you're interested in making money, yeah, you can go out and chase money. I personally am not interested in making money for the sake of making money. It doesn't make me happy. It might make other people happy. So that's why I, in this context, wanted to show that, well, here's what I think is the really true potential, the things that we can use it for, and I also believe, and I think the guys at the Singularity, they've said this, that if you focus on helping out 1 billion people in the world, You don't have to worry about money. If you focus on solving the really big problems, you're good. I think that's raising ourselves above our own egos or our own sort of personal needs, and serve a larger group of people, a larger community, in moving things forward. I think that's where happiness lies.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Quién más? Bueno, en lo que se animan, yo voy a hacer una. In the meantime, just looking at this quote, would you think that artificial intelligence would be a non-human way to solve our human issues?
Yeah, no, I think I have the same perspective, I think, on artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, all the new emerging technologies, that we are designing them. And artificial intelligence is not that smart. And we can do certain things with them. And I think the most powerful artificial intelligence that we've seen today is Google Translate. That's the biggest one. But we're also going to see how people are using it in ways that are not very productive or not very meaningful. But yeah, absolutely. I think that if you can make things smarter in a mindful way, absolutely. But I think the onus is actually on us. That it's not about technology. It's that we need to realize, as we are shifting a lot of the things that we used to do by hand, are now being shifted to technology because we don't want to do it. It's no fun to work on really heavy, dirty, poisonous gigs. It's more fun to work on creative stuff, artistic stuff. So therefore, humanity is sort of shifting that, and we want technology to solve that for us. But there's an important ask from technology, and that is that we need to upgrade ourselves. We need to shift mindset. We need to upgrade not just technology, but our perspective of what we do. And you can do that through education, but you can also do that in looking at the world differently. And the way I look at the world is, and that's what I had the picture of the first picture. We can go back to that, the introduction picture, which I find very important. And that is, I show the picture of the planet. And on this picture, you don't see countries. You just see borders. You don't see boundaries. Who said that we, came up with the idea that the most optimal way for us to collaborate is to live in 200 countries? It's man-made. And if we look at the result of that, yeah, we've been creating a lot of cool stuff, but we're also creating a lot of bad stuff. So to me, it's about rethinking this and saying, okay, can we do this smarter? Can we collaborate and coexist on this planet in a smarter way with the new emerging technologies? And that's why I'm exploring this nomadic perspective, and it becomes a way of understanding the world much better. And that's sort of the challenge that I'm sending out, both the challenge and the inspiration, that nothing is set in stone. But it's not easy. It's not easy to shift the status quo, because the status quo doesn't want to be changed.
Absolutely. ¿Tienen alguna otra pregunta? A ver, acá hay una pregunta, por favor, ayúdenme con el micrófono.
Hola, gracias. Hola, Per.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, gracias. Quería saber si nos puedes dar algunos ejemplos más aterrizados del uso de blockchain. Y en particular, sé que tu perspectiva es más de que sea un mundo sin barreras, pero ¿cómo verías o qué opinas del uso de blockchain por sector público, el gobierno como tal?
Vale, okay, so I'm going to work my way through this. So another example we can look at is, and this has to do with the public, but also private sector. So if you think about education, so the current system today, if you want to get a PhD, is that you need to go to university, and you spend 4 years. You need to create new knowledge. That's what it is. So you build on what everyone else has done, and then you create a little bit difference. And if you can prove that this knowledge is actually scientifically correct, and your peers, which are basically the professors and the other PhD candidates, are saying, yeah, this is new knowledge, and it's actually real new knowledge. It's not just made up knowledge. Then you get your PhD. And that's sort of before the Bitcoin and the blockchain platforms. Now, we are all connected, so we all have peers. All information is accessible to anyone. So there are people, I know people that are high school or college dropouts, but they have the knowledge of a PhD. So the blockchain, in theory, could actually give you a PhD. So you're active on your blog, and you're writing about things, and you're Instagramming, and you're doing all these things, and suddenly you become the best in the world, and you create a little bit of new knowledge. The blockchain can actually recognize that and say, oh, look at this, congratulations. Here's you're now a doctor, and now you can become a professor. So that's another way of looking at it. Because in the past, we needed this trust-based model, and we selected people in centralized people, and, professors and so forth. But if you look at it and you break it down and you understand what a PhD really is, someone that has created new knowledge that is verified and registered. And that registration happens in educational institutions in the past, and it can now happen on the internet. Within the public sector, I believe that nation states, if they're going to survive, and a lot of nation states are not going to survive, and we already see that there's a bunch of completely broken nation states in the world. But if they're going to survive, they need to shift and become a service platform. They need to shift and recognize that they're not centralized leaders of nation states anymore. They're actually service providers and platforms for us to be able to flourish. I think that's the big shift. And if the only thing that you take away from this is the core idea of blockchain and decentralization, it is that if you start thinking about it, and it might take a little bit of time to just let it sink in, but everything is a transaction. It doesn't have to be, it's a value transaction. I'm not talking about money. We often confuse those two things, or currencies. And everything is being verified and registered. If every transaction can be verified and registered and shared, just like we share things on Instagram, then we have the opportunity to collaborate, and we don't need to trust things. We don't need to sort of think about, is this a friend or a foe? Can I really trust them? Do I need this brand? Who do I trust? Do I trust Apple? It's because it's clearly proven. We have created consensus around a certain idea, and consensus is really the fundamental part of democracy. It's a new, more evolved version of democracy, which I find interesting.
¿Alguna última pregunta? Aprovechen acá, por favor, el micrófono.
Hola, Per.
Hola.
Muy interesante.
Gracias.
Bueno, yo estoy formado en ciencia política. Y mi pregunta va si precisamente, digo, por el tema, ¿no? por el título, How the Blockchain Can Redesign, es más una propuesta o una mirada al futuro. Y en ese sentido, la pregunta es si digamos, este marco que propones o que atisbas ha sido revisado por pares en ciencia social. A lo que voy es que es algo muy interesante lo que estás haciendo, porque generalmente pasa con la inteligencia artificial, que vemos cómo la tecnología surge y no se atisban, no se prevén los efectos sociales y culturales que causan. A mí me parece que aquí va un poco en el sentido contrario, ¿no? Estamos viendo la punta del iceberg, ¿no? Y se está estudiando, en tu caso, por ejemplo, estás estudiando todos los efectos que pueda tener socialmente y culturalmente. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿qué opinan de estos cambios que puede generar blockchain los científicos sociales?
Vale, gracias. Well, first, the future does not exist. So looking at the future and saying that this is happening in the future, well, it's dependent on what's happening now, on the now. So this idea, it's often, I'm not saying that in this case, but it's very often we're saying, well, this will happen in the future. But things just doesn't happen in the future. And I think and the reason I'm very passionate about this is that I feel that we've been so conditioned and so pacified in that we believe that if change is going to happen, it needs to happen in Silicon Valley. It needs to happen by kings and queens and presidents. It needs to happen by large corporations because we can't make the change. But we can. We never had greater opportunity to make change than we do today. So yesterday I was in Atlanta and I visited Martin Luther King's tomb and the house he was born in and the church. And it was really transformative. So I walked around in this neighborhood, which is still very African American. And this is one person. And he was obviously extraordinary, but it was a very emotional experience that here's a person that compared to all of us in here, every person in this room has got more power than he had in the 50s when he started his journey. He had no power. He was just viewed as a slave. And then he took that and he started to create the movement, and he moved the needle, and he just shifted the whole world. And that is just mind-blowing. So I don't think it's far-fetched to look at these, a bunch of role models and say, wait a second, they can do it, we can do it as well. And to ask more precisely your question, I think it's an excellent opportunity to move into blockchain today. So I started with the internet a long time ago when no one cared. Working in Silicon Valley was the absolute, I had friends that thought, you are a fucking loser. Seriously, today you're a rock star, but then you are a fucking loser. Why are you bothering? You're never going to make money. It's a play area. Internet. So I started working professionally when there's 14 million people online. 14 million people. Now we have almost 4 billion people online. No one cared. And that's the thing with blockchain. This is such a great opportunity to move into blockchain from the perspective of political science and start to research and build things. You can be professor in blockchain within political science within 2-3 years. A really good friend of mine, he hasn't even done his PhD. He became a professor in e-commerce within a couple of years because he was just he learned everything he could about it. So there's such a great opportunity to go where no one else is looking. But if you wait until everyone is using an iPhone and start creating apps when people are already using, the App Store, it's much harder to succeed. So therefore, I gave a talk at the blockchain conference in Chile a couple of weeks ago, and I met this really cool professor in finance. And he was in his 70s, and he was the quintessential philosophy professor, but he was finance. And he came from the 60s, been smoking pot, listened to Pink Floyd, all that that whole thing, and brightest, one of the smartest person I ever met. So open-minded, and he dove into blockchain a couple of years ago and started looking at what's the impact of blockchain and Bitcoin on crowd financing and crowdsourcing. So on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and he started to create models around that. And now he's one of the best, he's one of the authorities, one of the biggest experts in the world on this. And he's 70. He's 70 years old. I think it's awesome. So, I mean, my learning from the stuff that I've been interested in, which is often very niche stuff that no one cares about, that's the best place to be. And that's where the blockchain is today. And the reason why it's not big yet is there's this technology that is fairly complex if you start to get it in under the hood, which also a car is if you get in under the hood. And then you have a couple of protocols, but you don't have a lot of applications yet. And that's what makes it a little bit challenging.
Well, I think son todas las preguntas. ¿Alguna más? Ah, bueno, acá hay una última. ¿Me ayudan con un micrófono, por favor? Aquí adelante.
Good dag. Hi, my name is Clarissa, and you talked about the blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and you mentioned that there's actually a big market for it. I mean, there are 3 billion people who are like living in poverty or even under it, and it's just a relatively young technology, but why isn't there like a lot of people using it? And give or take around how many years will it take before a lot of people, like considerable amount of people will be using it instead of like tangible currency or traditional currency?
So, it's a great opportunity. I mean, 3 billion people that you can bring into the marketplace. That's an enormous amount of people. So, and there's a bunch of blockchain startups. It's just that they're not being talked about in media. But if you're interested, you can. To learn more about these, I tweet a lot about these. This is pretty much one of the things that I'm doing. So you can just follow me on Twitter, and I'll share more about these different companies, because I'm switching. So there's a new browser that's called Brave. Instead of using Chrome or Safari, it's Brave, and it's blockchain based. So there's a bunch of already existing early applications. So it's a little bit like for social media. This is a little bit like 2005, when social media was called user-generated content. 2004, 2005. This is when Facebook just started, when like 10 people used Facebook. Maybe that was 2003. So, and now they have 2 billion users. So I think it's going to accelerate, and it's going to happen much quicker, just because everything is becoming exponential once you're connected in a network. So it took some time. It took from 1969 until today to get 4 billion people online. And every new disruptive technology is taking less and less time, and also for applications. I mean, Instagram became this big really, really quickly, and Snapchat even faster. But I think that everyone in this room, within the next 2 years, are going to use cryptocurrencies to pay for things. And I did an experiment last year. Last year, I only used cryptocurrencies to pay for everything. And I have this card, I think I brought with me. I actually used it this morning, that I had got some Bitcoins on. So this card, this is a debit card. And it's fantastic, because I can transfer money however I want. And it takes about a second to transfer money and buy and sell in different kind of currencies, both fiat and crypto. So I did this experiment because I wanted to, yet again, understand the potential. I wanted to understand how it feels to use the technology. So I think within the next 2 years is where we're going to see this. And it's going to be a shift. And I'm so... And I say this from the perspective of that I used it last year. And cryptocurrencies are far superior to fiat currencies from an individual perspective. They're going to create a lot of havoc for nation states and large organizations. But from an individual perspective, it's amazing to be able to have access to your money 24/7, to not be afraid of someone else going to dip their toes into your cash or into your money. And you can use them anywhere in the world and do transactions. And you can do transactions in between people without asking for permission. There's still a lot of things we need to figure out, but it's early. So I think it's going to happen really, really quickly. And it already has. I mean, it exploded, went mainstream last year. And this year it's been, we've seen the resistance. And the resistance just proves that this is really, really good stuff, from my perspective.
Thank you so much, Per. Creo
All
que
right,
con
great.
eso lo vamos a dejar.
Vale.
Le demos
Gracias.
un fuerte aplauso.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome.
Thank
Bueno, estamos ya llegando casi al final del programa. Lo que les tenemos ahorita es un momento de chill out. Va a estar tocando Same DJ. Los invitamos a que pasen a la barra si quieren echarse un drink o una cervecita. Y a las 6 ya viene el grand finale con Red Bull, las batallas de gallos, y tenemos varias sorpresas para ustedes. O sea que relájense y a las 6, que ya no falta tanto, nos vemos para ya lo último de estos 3 días y gracias por acompañarnos.